Hello all, this is Lysander with Parnassian Studios, here to demonstrate our new rotational menu system, which will be up on the Unity Asset Store very soon. The system essentially works with two core scripts, the first of which is a canvas manager, and we call it the rotational screen manager. And what this does is it takes two world space canvases and turns them on, turns them off, arranges them on the screen, connecting the edges, and then transitioning from one to the other. And you can see this in our little demonstration here, going from one menu to another. Oop, I have transitions turned off. So with linear, you can see how it transitions from one to the other. This is a world space canvas here, and the moment you transition or choose to navigate to another screen, it attaches a second world space canvas to the side and transitions to it. Now, there are a couple of options with that. First, you have to assign it a camera. We included a camera in here. It's a perspective camera. It's the only way that certain motions are visible. It's really the reason for using world space canvases is so that you can use perspective. So you assign it your own little dedicated camera to the menu system here. You can actually ease the transitions if you set an easing equation. What this does is it makes it so that when transitioning from one screen to another, it actually will ease into the animation and then ease out of the animation. And you can tell, you can tell by how the animation sort of has a slightly elastic feel to it. Okay, let's just change the default there so I don't have to keep doing that. And you can set, for the easing type, you can set the easing equation. There's linear is basically no easing. Quad, exponential, cubic, quart, quint, and sinusoidal. Easing types, really you can look up explanations, descriptions for those easing equations, but really it's best to just play around with it. You can set the easing limitations, whether it's just on the in to the animation, the end portion, the very beginning of the animation, that it eases, the out part of the animation that it eases, both, which is the default, or reversing the easing, which can have odd effects sometimes, but it's there for completion sake. Now, how this normally works is if you do not assign a primary screen, the primary screen is basically the canvas that you're always looking at when you're not currently in a transition. So it's what's showing the current menu on the screen pretty much at all times that the system's up. Now, I made it so that it just uses it uses basically the demonstration canvas. This canvas here is what I turn on in order to edit the menus here in the editor. It essentially, I mean, this canvas is it's currently a screen space screen space camera, so it's like an overlay on the screen. Uses screen space, so it's just like 0% to 100%, 0% to 100%. Screen space is how the thing works. Now, when you use the same menus that are created in screen space and you use them for the screen manager here, it essentially converts, or rather adapts the world space canvas so that it fits the screen perfectly and matches the resolution, matches the aspect ratio, and can do a lot of the same things that any screen space canvas can do, including matching the width or matching the height of the reference resolution that you set here. So consider this like these settings here for like your canvas scaler, essentially. So put in the same reference resolution that you use for your screen space canvas here. See, same reference resolution, same screen match mode, and it will match that in world space dynamically on the fly. Very cool. Now you can, if you want to do some particular settings, like with your raycaster, or with how many with your pixel density, with the reference pixel density, things like that, with the canvas, with the world space canvas that you want the system to use, then you can do what I did here and drag the screen space canvas into this slot, and it will convert it on play into a world space canvas. But it will keep a lot of those. Stop the maximize on play here so I can show you. So as you can see now, it's a world space canvas. But it'll keep a lot of the things like the layer that it's currently on, the graphics raycaster. If you have one attached, it'll keep all those settings. If you have a canvas group attached, you can set it to ignore the parent group, stuff like that. There are a lot of settings that are overwritten in order to make it work with the system, but there are also a lot of settings that are kept. So you have the option of using your own there. If you do not use your own, like for instance, if I go in here and I set this to none, so it's not using a primary screen, it will create it from scratch on play. So you do not have to use your own. You can just treat this like a testing canvas and leave it off, when it plays. It'll take these menus that you assign to be used in the menu system. It'll take these and it'll assign them to the new primary screen and transition screen as necessary. So now that that's not set to anything, if I hit play, you'll see it creates a primary screen and a transition screen. And the primary screen has pretty much all the same settings still. See, still works fine. So you can do it either way. Now, now that's how the canvases are managed. Everything adapts to the resolution, adapts to the aspect ratio. It's all very very cool. I like it quite a bit. The menu manager, on the other hand, is how the actual menus, the content. If the canvases are like picture frames that are being being scaled up and down to fit the screen and all that, the menus are the pictures that go in those picture frames, and the menu manager is what navigates through those menus. It organizes and navigates through them so that there's actually something in those picture frames that's being displayed on the screen. Now, the menus themselves, you can use whatever menus you already have made for screen space, be it a screen space camera or a screen space overlay. You can use all of the exact same menus. You can use the percentages, the anchors. You don't have to use hard-coded pixel values. All of that's going to automatically get scaled when it gets brought into the canvas handler here. So just use your normal menus that you've already made. There's the demonstration menus that I've included here, but this is not a menu generator. This is not like a system that you can use to help you build your menus. You have to build your menus on your own. This is just a way of organizing and navigating through those menus in world space using world space transitions. So here I've got some menus. Now all you have to do is slap these little scripts on them, like identifying this as a primary screen. A primary screen is essentially like the backbone of the menu system. It's when you start it up, the primary screens are the ones that you're navigating through first. Navigation 1, navigation 2, navigation 3, these are all primary screens. Now, to turn a menu that you already have into a primary screen, all you have to do is attach the script to it, say that it's active. You don't have to give it a group ID or anything. And then put it in the primary menus list here. This is slightly messy, this inspector here. But the primary menus list here is a list of all the primary menus that you're starting out with in this menu. So just drag them all in there, and that's it. It'll work. I mean, you can start it up and you can navigate through them. Now, let's see. Oh yeah, within each primary menu, you'll see there's a list of submenus. So each primary menu can have as many submenus as you like. Again, to make a submenu, all you have to do is put a submenu script on it, say that it's active. If it's not active, then using the normal navigation controls, going left, right, up, down, to navigate through your menu list, will skip over it. It won't even show up in the list. You know, it'll just skip right over. You can still use the hard-coded like links, like go to menu, the buttons, to go to that menu if it's in the navigation system, even if it's turned off. So this is go to navigation 3. So even if navigation 3 is turned off, you'll be able to see. I'll just tell it it's not active here. So if I try to go to 3, it skips over it from 2 to 4. But if I use these buttons to go straight to 3, it'll still go to it. So the active or inactive is just for the default navigation system. If you have the hard-coded values, then you're going to have to check the status of that menu. If you don't want it to link to that menu, if it's disabled, then you're going to have to check the status and disable the button, or remove this UI element entirely. If it's inactive, make it hidden. That's up to you. Those are sort of overrides to the system, these buttons. So implementing them is still partially, your responsibility for whatever you choose to implement here. Let's see. Some things with the menu manager. You can set it to allow primary and submenu wraparounds. What that means is that when it reaches the final index, like if you're navigating through the primary menus here and you're going forward, 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 and you get to the last one and then you go forward again, the wraparound allows it to go back to 0. So go back to the first option in the list, and vice versa. If you're at 0, you can navigate up and it'll go to the last menu in the list. So by default, I have the primary wraparound turned on. So you can tell the options is the first menu in the system. If I go back, it goes to navigation 5. If I go forward, it goes to options. If I turn off, I have in the options screen here, you can actually toggle a lot of these for demonstration purposes. So if you toggle the primary menu wraparound off, you can see the arrow disappears. You can't go in that direction anymore. Turn it back on, then you can go in that direction. Let's see, a couple of other things. Self-detecting swipes. Yeah, as you can see, I'm half the time, instead of using the arrows, I'm actually dragging on the screen. So if I drag to the left, it moves the menu to the right. If I drag to the right, it moves the menu to the left. You can have your own input implementation and just wire into, send commands to the system as needed. But if you check this, then the system has a built-in method for detecting swipes on the screen for mobile devices, and also, as you can see on the computer. Works on both. So if you check that, then it'll automatically detect the input and work. The navigation arrows aren't technically a part of the system that I built here. They're sort of examples of how you can implement your own if you choose to. You can use these arrows, or you can use the scripts attached to them. I mean, you can just use everything in here as is if you want. I mean, it's sort of ugly. I'm not a UI designer. But yeah, the arrows are sort of overrides that do the same thing. Like the swiping left and right, it generates a direction, and it says go right. And clicking this button does the same thing. It just sends the go right command to the menu manager. So it's all very simple, very easy to control. Let's see. Menu open transitions and menu close transitions. That's just the exiting and opening the actual menu system. So you can turn those off if you want, and it'll make it instant. At any time, you can also set skip transitions. This actually doesn't work for the opening and closing. Those have to be set manually. But for all of the actual menu transitions in this system, if you toggle the skip transitions, and this might actually be an option that's actually visible to your users, like in the option screen. Like, hey, those transitions are cool, but I don't want to see them anymore. I want to get around the menu system a little bit faster. So you could check that. And regardless of what the transition types are set to for your primary to primary transitions or your sub to sub transitions, etc., it'll just skip them. So let's see. There's some options in here for the minimum percentage of the screen that you have to swipe across. It uses whatever the widest between the width and height. Whatever's biggest. That's what it uses for this. So if you set it to 0.1, it's saying 10% of the screen is what you have to swipe across for it to count as a swipe. And it's 10% of the widest side. So here it's the width. Swipe max delay is the max number of seconds that can pass between starting a swipe and ending it for it to still count as a swipe. The max transition queue, you can actually, if you drag quickly or you hit the arrow buttons fast, you can actually queue up several transitions. And it's sort of cute. I don't know how helpful it'll be. I set the max transition queue, the max number of things you can have queued at once, to 2. I really don't recommend going much higher than that. And keep in mind that if you queue up a command, a directional command that is invalid, like if I were to swipe to go to the right and then up, and there's no up, the moment it hits that up, it clears the queue. It doesn't just skip it. It just clears the queue from then on. So even if I set this to 4, I can queue up 4 transitions simultaneously. But if I go to the right and then up, and then to the right, it clears the queue because this command was invalid. And it assumes that if this command was invalid, then anything after that was unintentional or isn't going to go in the direction that you really wanted to go in. So I recommend putting this at 1 or 2, really. The transition time is the amount of time it takes to get from one menu to the next. So if you bring this down, it goes faster. Primary menu and orientation. As you can tell, I'm doing this horizontally for the primary menus. If you set it to vertical, and I really should have did that from the options screen instead. These things are set up in such a way that if you change them in the inspector, it doesn't update. It doesn't send an event update to anything that's listening for it. But if you change it here in the options screen, the little demonstration I made, then it sends an update and says, hey, this has changed to everything, which means the navigation arrows and things like that get an update and say, okay, now there's different directions that we can go in, and will update themselves accordingly. So if you're testing something out and you want to get a real feel for how it works, I recommend if the option exists in this options menu, I suggest checking it out from here instead of in the inspector. So here you can set the orientation. So now up and down goes through all of the primary menus instead of left and right. The transition types, the primary to primary transitions, you can set here. So it has different. You can set different transitions for your primary to primary as opposed to your sub to sub menu navigations here. So say I want to navigate, I want to rotate. Let's put this back to horizontal. I want to rotate from primary menu to primary menu at 45 degrees. But from submenu to submenu, I just want it to be linear. So here you can see a slight curvature to the transition here. But if we're going from a primary menu to a submenu, there's no curvature. But you can also set it so that it will curve, just not as much. Let's say you want a much heavier curve to the left and right because the screen's wider than it is tall. So to get something that looks roughly like the same feel for the transition, you have to rotate at a steeper angle, left and right. So this is 60 degrees, and then up and down will be 30 degrees. And it'll look roughly the same, like from a feel of the transition perspective. On the other hand, if you set the sub, if you set whatever is the vertical, because the sub menus take whatever orientation the primary menus don't. So if the primary menus are horizontal, then the sub menus are going to be vertical. So whatever's vertical, you really don't want to have a really high rotation. Unless your screen, and at least while your width is bigger than your height here. If your aspect ratio is the opposite, then what I'm saying will probably be the opposite as well. But right now, say, well, let's just switch this to vertical. Now, say the primary transitions are 60. I mean, this really starts to get, the distortion starts to get a little much to handle. I mean, that's fine. I mean, that's sort of okay. This 90-degree rotation is sort of okay if you're horizontal. This is how Ocarina of Time worked. Like it's a box. It's just a plain 6-sided box. But doing it vertically, I mean, that's harsh. That's going to start to hurt your eyes, disorient you a little bit. So just take care on the settings you pick here. Extra menus are interesting. They're not technically a part of the navigation system. They're more like overrides. So an extra menu is a menu that is not actually, you can't navigate to it normally. You can't click a button, really, or a normal go-to menu button because it's not in the navigation system. You can't swipe left and right or use the arrows to go and find an extra menu. They have to be very specifically selected. Now, an extra menu, here on Navigation 5, you can test out the extra menus. And this one here will open in the relative forward direction, so it'll open to the bottom. And while it's up, it's basically an override to the system. The system is still navigated to Navigation 5. This is still the currently active menu within the navigation system, even if you go to an extra menu. So extra menu. But Navigation 5 is still active. So I only get one navigation choice, and the navigation choice is to go back to Navigation 5. Now, if I go back down, you'll see the submenu for Navigation 5 as opposed to the extra menu. The extra menu is only up for the few seconds after you, or whatever, after you click a link to specifically open an extra menu. So this one opened in the backwards direction, which is up. Now, since it's set to flip up and down, is sort of an odd, sort of doesn't feel like it's navigating in specific directions. If I were to set this to rotate instead, or just be linear, then you might get a better idea for this. This opens in the forward direction, extra menu. And then you can go back and see there's actually a submenu down here. It's not the extra menu anymore. and then this one opens in the backwards direction. So whatever the opposite orientation is. You can still use the go to menu links to go to some other menu from an extra menu. But because the current active menu is technically navigation 5, then the auto transitions and stuff will assume you're on 5. So moving from the extra menu to navigation 4 will move to the left. So the extra menus can be interesting for things that you want to be available at multiple locations within the navigation system, but you don't want them to be navigatable. You don't want to be able to go directly to them. You want to have to click a link to open them up. So if I had some sort of an info screen, for instance, for a character or something, and I wanted to be able to open it from here, but I also wanted to be able to open it from navigation 2, then the extra menu would be useful. Let's see. Anything else? You can set a default primary menu. As you can see, the options menu is technically 0 in my list. But whenever I close and open the system, it opens in navigation 1. That's because navigation 1 is set to the default primary. So it actually starts in the middle of the list. So yeah, there's just a couple of things. Just the way that the overlays have been implemented, like the navigation arrows, the close menu system link there, the X. Stuff like that, the option screen. That's all not really technically a part of the system. It's just an example. But again, you can use it. The overlays are completely separate from the system. So you can make your own overlay menus and you can interact with them using the events. Like I have an example here. You hit info, it'll bring up an overlay menu. Okay, and while that menu's open, because I have a script attached to this, it will disable the navigation controls. Or rather than disabling it, it sort of suggests that navigation shouldn't be possible. Implementing whether or not navigation can actually happen, whether these arrows work or not, is really up to you. You have to make these arrows or the canvas, the menu system for the navigation here, the navigation overlay. You have to tell it to check whenever a setting is changed. Like, hey, navigation's been disabled, so maybe we should disable ourselves. I really didn't want to hard code in a sort of a disabling function. I want you to be able to override it as necessary. I want it to be up to the implementation. So if you click info, it'll bring up an overlay. You'll see you can't navigate. Even if I drag, no navigation. That part is hard coded. The internal swipe detector will check to see if navigation is disabled. So yeah, this is an overlay screen. I have it set so that if you click outside of this box, it'll just make that disappear and everything goes back to normal. But yeah, the overlay menu there is not really a part of the system. It's just an example of how to override the system, how to use it, in other situations where maybe my implementation of the navigation system isn't good enough for you, isn't good enough for what you need it for, which, it's going to be a lot because this is a guide, a sort of startup, it's a shortcut to get a decent organization navigation, thing going. This isn't supposed to be the end all to your UI. So yeah, those are just a couple of things that you can do with our system. If you want more details about the scripting side of things, like the public variables, the events, the functions, methods that you can call for the menu system and for the canvas system or the screen system that I use, it's in the documentation. There's a very detailed documentation included with the program or with the package. So all the info should be in there that you need. I'm going to make a quick start guide as well, like 4 or 5 pages, just showing screenshots of how to get yourself going. Or you can just use the demo scene here, which is also included in the project. So I hope you guys had fun. That's basically it. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll try to do my best to answer them. And thanks.